This crowd is trying to disable one of the new security cameras that have been put up here as kind of an experimental operation to start increasing surveillance in this part of Hong Kong. The ones on the outside are basically there to form a human wall to protect the identities of the people that are actually up at the post, breaking open these cameras, getting into the guts and ripping them out.
我哋會用雨傘啦，我哋會用一啲可能噴漆將嗰個 camera 噴走咗啦。咁如果一啲 camera 好高嘅時候咧，我哋可能會用一啲強光。
Protesters in Hong Kong fear they're being watched and tracked when on the streets, and just showing up may expose them to retaliation from the government. More than 1,000 people have been arrested since the pro-democracy protests against China's growing control over Hong Kong started in June.
You might be doing something that you think is perfectly fine right now, but then later you might be charged based on camera footage, based on geolocation data from your mobile phone, and so on.
Lachman Choi researches personal data protection and digital security in Hong Kong. He supports the pro-democracy movement.
We don't know what kind of data the Hong Kong law enforcement is sharing with the Chinese law enforcement.
While covering pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong, we found that protesters have developed a number of tactics to protect their identities and avoid detection both online and on the streets. Before the streets become chaotic, the scene is usually pretty calm. Some are already decked out in protective gear and busy on their phones. To exchange files with somebody nearby, those with iPhones use AirDrop.
AirDrop 就係比較匿名化咯，人哋唔會知係邊個 send 俾你，你亦都唔知邊個會收到呢樣嘢。
Desmond Fung has joined protests almost every weekend since June. He says the central nervous system of this leaderless protest movement is the anonymous, encrypted messaging service Telegram. Downloads of the app in Hong Kong have soared since the protests began.
What we're seeing here.
佢哋一啲市民可能喺邊個位置見到有好多嘅警車出現咧，佢就會搜翻喺呢個 group 度嘅。前線嘅人咧可以安全少少。
Aren't the police on there as well, reading everything that you write?
我哋有一個 term 叫捉鬼，就係我哋咧會揾下究竟邊啲係警察，然之後會將佢踢翻出 group 嘅。
Desmond said there are ways to sniff out spies, but he didn't want to share specifics or show us the private chats on his phone, because sometimes these chats are about taking radical measures. These are the most hardcore protesters. Police consider them violent and often target them for arrest.
They're getting ready to go up to the front and actually confront the police. They're the ones with the most at stake in terms of obscuring their identity.
Protesters aren't just worried about surveillance cameras, but also the police's own camera crews. Protesters worry any footage could later be used as evidence against them.
The police will try to find you if you don't cover all your face. Even your ears will be evidence to arrest you.
Many protesters' kits also include this. Laser pointers have become a thing in these protests. They are used to distract the police and blind cameras. Protesters can buy these kinds of laser pointers at any electronics store, and they typically cost about $10. Police have called them offensive weapons, which means they can arrest someone for causing injuries with lasers.
我哋好多同事係俾呢啲嘅物品咧係整傷咗嘅，甚至我哋有一啲嘅錄影機咧感光嗰度壞咗嘅。
Police also cite medical experts who say the beams can cause permanent eye damage.
呢個其實根本冇攻擊性嘅，譬如我其實自己射自己我都唔會驚。即係因為完全冇問題。
Protesters' methods can also be very DIY.
He's handing out tinfoil, and what he's doing is he's wrapping people's Hong Kong IDs with tinfoil in hopes that a law enforcement official won't be able to scan the ID remotely.
Protesters want to prevent police from tracking them via the radio frequency identification chips embedded in their Hong Kong identification cards, subway cards, or credit cards. The government says only authorized sensors that are within 2 centimeters of the smart IDs are able to pick up the information. To avoid having their movements recorded on their regular subway cards, they pay for one-way tickets home from the protests with cash.
買單程飛就可以減少佢追尋到我哋嘅方法啦。
These tactics to avoid surveillance go hand in hand with avoiding arrest. But if it does happen, Protesters also use a simple hack to try to protect the data on their phones.
我哋而家係唔會用指紋去開呢個手機鎖嘅，因為好怕如果俾警方捉到嘅時候咧，佢可以攞住我哋手指或者我哋嘅面，將 face detection 我哋都唔會用嘅。
Here in Hong Kong, you have the right to not reveal any knowledge that might incriminate you. And so a PIN code is knowledge, but your fingerprint or your face is not necessarily knowledge that you reveal to the authorities.
As the movement evolves, police are deploying new tactics to tag protesters, like using water cannons laced with blue dye.
Hanging over all of this is the fear that their identities will get swept up digitally and end up in a database, perhaps in Beijing, that tracks them and follows them for the rest of their lives.
Protesters told us they'll keep playing the cat and mouse game of avoiding surveillance while defying the government. They say they won't stop until their demands are met, including an inquiry into police brutality and direct elections. The Hong Kong government has taken some action, like withdrawing a controversial extradition bill that sparked the protests. It says it is looking for ways to start a dialogue to address the discontent. In the end, the odds are stacked against them. It's essentially a group of young Hong Kongers with laser pointers and umbrellas against the will of mainland China.
How do you see this playing out for the future?
I don't know actually. The chance of success is almost zero, but we still need to do this because of the justice, because we love this place.
It has been a long summer of dissent. From the public street to cyberspace, among demonstrators and police, tactics are morphing. Technology is changing the nature of protest. And in the shadow of the greatest surveillance state on earth, Hong Kong is on the front line. On a street corner in Kowloon, they're burning joss paper. Traditional prayers at a vigil against police violence. But the old tactics are evolving. From static demos to fluid strikes, they take their inspiration from an old Bruce Lee saying, "Be water."
When you need to go forward, you go forward. But when you need to step back, you step back.
This is a shape-shifting, leaderless revolt, fighting a battle in the streets and online.
If we don't fight in this year, maybe it's our last chance.
The protesters organise on messaging apps like Telegram to guard their anonymity. They operate effectively as self-contained cells. This past weekend was typical. Some hand out umbrellas or bottles of water, others bring medical supplies or saline solution to wash out tear-gassed eyes. The key thing is, there's no central control.
So you don't have to know each other. As long as you have the same goal, you have the same objective, people get it together, do the right thing. We don't have to get a very solid organization though, so like you won't get bust easily.
Front lines ebb and flow. Demos pop up in locations across the city. It's the essence of Be Water. Their targets are often police or government buildings, and where they once came armed only with slogans, now they have bricks and Molotov cocktails.
There are no leaders here, there's no hierarchy. It's all completely self-organizing. So it doesn't matter how much tear gas they fire, how many arrests they make. It's very difficult for the police to deal with this.
The police are often left fighting an analog battle in a digital age. Sure, they have superior firepower, tear gas, rubber bullets and water cannon. And when they charge, they can clear the streets quite effectively. But the protesters are mostly young and willing to take risks. They're also tech savvy.
Of course, this is one battlefield, the battle of the streets. But there's a whole other realm where this is being fought out, behind computer screens, smartphones, and with cameras.
In cyberspace, it's the protesters who have the upper hand. A meme can be mightier than a Molotov cocktail. Online chat groups are full of agitprop and plans for the next demo. Proposals are floated on social media, locations, timings, tactics. People then vote them up or down.
So it is very organic, and the worst idea will be eliminated. It's just and the best survives. By the upvoting mechanism, people can choose the best step coming next, and this will make the movement evolve very quickly, because it's just like the evolution. Yeah. And the government cannot find people to arrest to stop the movement.
But the protesters also fear that technology is being used against them. From CCTV to contactless travel cards, they believe the government is tracking their movement. In August, protesters gathered around something called a smart lamppost, a new device the government says it's trialling to monitor weather and traffic conditions.
Some protesters just try to destroy the smart lamppost and to try to see what is inside.
Ventus Lau was one of the organizers of the protest.
So it is suspected that AI technology will be used to recognize our faces when we walk by the smart lampposts.
Mr. Lau was arrested 24 hours after our interview and held without charge for 2 days. "20 miles from Hong Kong Island is the mainland city of Shenzhen. China's growing might is not just economic and political, it's technological too. China is at the cutting edge of surveillance technology. Its citizens are some of the most monitored anywhere in the world, and the authoritarian nature of the state has helped Chinese companies become leaders in facial recognition. Many Hong Kongers fear that if that combination of technology and authoritarianism is brought to bear on their city, it'll spell the end for their rights and freedoms. In China, they're using surveillance data in places like Xinjiang to control the Uyghur population, and across the mainland to implement a social credit system. Welfare benefits, school admissions, the right to travel. Citizens can have privileges granted or taken away according to their observed behavior. This is powerful technology, and without oversight, it has dystopian implications.
Because our government is not democratically elected, they are not politically responsible and accountable to the public. So I think any kind of so-called civilian technology may not be good for Hong Kong under a non-democratically elected government.
This, then, is why the protesters are so careful to conceal their identities. But in reality, the police in Hong Kong are still lagging behind in their use of facial recognition. All those CCTV cameras, even the smart lampposts, they can take pictures, but we understand the Hong Kong authorities don't have the kind of sophisticated AI-driven technology to analyze the data. Not yet, anyway. We've learnt that several weeks into these protests, the Hong Kong police approached a British company for their facial recognition software. Now, we understand that no deal has yet been done, but a senior Hong Kong law enforcement official said they needed the new technology. At the moment, then, they're on the back foot, but they're looking to catch up. As the protesters' tactics evolve and some become more violent, so the authorities are responding with increasingly sinister methods. Unable to identify any ringleaders, young people are being arrested seemingly at random and their families investigated. At a courthouse in Hong Kong, we went to a hearing for 3 teenage school children who'd been detained after attending a screening of a political documentary. They weren't charged with any crime, but the court had ordered the children be taken into care. I spoke to the sister of one of them, a 15-year-old boy who didn't want to be identified on camera.
We were so worried. My mom cried like every day because we just cannot believe it. Such a good kid. How come you can just take him away from us, from a normal family?
After a month-long investigation into his home life and his school record, a judge overturned the order, but it sent a chilling message.
I feel that I shouldn't go to any protest. We shouldn't appear on the street because at any moment the police could come out and arrest me. I get scared.
All of this hasn't stopped huge numbers of people coming out in weekly peaceful demonstrations. In fact, it's fueling the protests. For now, it seems the Hong Kong authorities are having to rely on their allies in Beijing for help with monitoring and surveillance.
I have it from a good source who should be in a position to know that among these crowds there will be mainland Chinese agents. Everyone films on their mobile phones, so will they be. And they'll be taking that footage, they'll be feeding it through their own facial recognition software, and then they'll be feeding that information back to the Hong Kong police.
Well, of course, mainland is a very big hand. They have very big gun. They are not just demonstrating that force towards Hong Kong, but to the world. Well, I think the Pandora box is open, and people are more aware of their rights. Likewise, people is now very alert to their own privacy. So people are protecting their life, their job, their freedom, and their free will.
Surveillance technology is about to change all of our lives. Not just in China, but in Britain too, and across the world. This is about a radical realignment in our relationship with machines and those who control it. Hong Kong's battles today could be ours tomorrow.